So I believe we're live on YouTube now. So very warm welcome if you're joining us on YouTube. And now it looks like we're starting to go live on Zoom as well. I'm starting to see some faces appear on the screen. Yeah, do show us your video if you can. It's nice to see you there. So yeah, we'll just give a few minutes just for everyone to turn up, and then I'll introduce what we'll be doing tonight. So yeah, my name's Sthiramanas, and I'm here with Devamitra, and we're in Devamitra's bedroom.
And office.
Bedroom and office, and writing retreat, and cancer convalescence unit.
That's right.
And yeah. So yeah, let me say, I'll start just by saying a little bit about how it'll work tonight. So yeah, in a second I'll say a few words just of introduction to Devamitra, who we're here to hear talk about his new book, Entertaining Cancer, a Buddhist Perspective. So Entertaining Cancer, the Buddhist Way. I'll get the title right. So that's this book here. I'm sure I'll show that again in a sec. So yes, very warm welcome if you're joining us. So I'll introduce Devamitra, and then at the end we'll have the opportunity to ask some questions as well. So if you come up with any questions as we're going, then do keep track of them, so that you can ask at the end. So yes, I'll just a few words of introduction to you. Okay, 1972 you came community, and you were an actor at the time in your 20s, and then got very involved very quickly with what was the very beginnings of our Buddhist tradition, and you met and since then has basically given his life the last to helping to develop this movement that we're a part of. Involved setting up a centre in Norwich, involved many years overseeing people across the world, so visiting lots of different Buddhist centres and helping as in the role of overall Mitra convener. So you were doing that for a long time. And mainly just through that time, just really intense in practicing the Dharma very, very intensively. So one thing that's very striking about Devamitra is how wholehearted he is about Buddhist practice. So, for example, you've lived most of your adult life in communities, and now your Devamitra is the rest of us, I think, in the community are there's no one over 40 in the community apart from you. So we've got
no, I'm twice as old. Twice as old as the next youngest, I'm sure.
And but living in community has been a very sort of big feature of your life, as has spending time all over the world, but also particularly in India. And I believe some of your friends from India will be tuning in. We've got people on YouTube as well as on Zoom. And also solitude as well has been a big feature, and you talk about that in the book a lot. So very frequently going on solitary retreats, including about maybe 9 years ago, you went on a 9-month solitary retreat, which has been a big, which is something you refer to quite a lot. So very intensive Dharma practice over that time, and then about 5 years ago that you got this cancer diagnosis.
5 years.
And out of that has emerged this book that we're talking about. So we'll hear more about that in a sec. And I'm very fortunate to be good friends with you, Devamitra. So You've been ordained for almost 50 years. I've been ordained for almost 2. So I'm your younger brother in the order. And I've lived with I've known Devamitra largely through living with him. So we've lived here together in Sthiramanas community at the London Buddhist Centre for 5.5 or so years. And what's sort of poignant for me in this book launch is that it tracks Devamitra's narrative tracks largely the time that we've lived together. It was very soon after I moved into this community and started getting to know you that you got this cancer diagnosis. And so what you're writing about, I've sort of lived through with you in a sense. And I know that that's had a really big impact on me. And actually reading your writings on this, which have eventually turned into this book, the combination of that and living with you and hearing your reflections have been very impactful on me. I've really felt like I've learned a lot from you in that process. So I'm really pleased to see it becoming this book. I'll show you again. I'll show you a couple of times. There we go, in the middle of the screen. So you've got a very pink, you've got a near shocking pink spine to your book as well, which is very suiting to your character indeed. Yeah, maybe you could just kick us off by just saying a little bit about the book. What is this book about, Entertaining Cancer?
Well, first of all, it started off by me simply not intending to write a book at all. I just wanted to objectify my experience because I realized that I had a tremendous opportunity with this cancer to face my own mortality, to accept the fact that I had a very, very serious disease. And of course, there was a lot of the emotion and feeling arose at that time. And I needed to objectify what my experience actually was. So it began in that sort of way. So I kept on going, especially through the hardcore treatments, just to understand what was going on better for myself. I don't just mean with the cancer treatment itself, but what was happening with my body and what was happening with my mind. And right from the offset, I tried to maintain or sustain skillful mental state. Immediately that it was, she was pretty convinced that's what it was. So that's how the whole thing came about. And I just kept writing and eventually realized that there was the possibility of a book out of all of this. And more than that, but it was a book which could help other people. One of my friends mentioned to me, in fact, that he'd showed some of my writings to a woman in India who had been diagnosed with quite a serious cancer. And she'd taken great encouragement and inspiration from my writings. And even though she was Indian living in Bombay, she managed to sort of catch my sense of humor as well. So I think she found that lightened her own burden. So I was very, very pleased about that. And I just kept on writing and wanted to write more and more until I could produce something which would be of value to other people rather than just me clarifying what my experience was.
So yeah, it's very striking in the book that it's a very reflective book. You've got a lot that you're sort of processing and putting down in writing in terms of what's, as you say, going on, particularly in your mind and how this relates to your practice. But it's also very much a narrative as well, isn't it? It expands a period of time and you're telling a story. Maybe you could just give us a little précis of what that sort of story is. Maybe I've kind of touched on it in that you're living here.
The overall narrative, you mean?
Yeah, just the overall narrative of sort of what sort of happened, what happened to you in a way over those years.
Okay, well, first of all, I suppose to start with the diagnosis. It was a shock. I think most people who are diagnosed with cancer find it quite a shock. I certainly didn't expect to get cancer because I was extremely fit and had led a healthy life. I've never been a smoker. I've hardly ever consumed. When I was young, I consumed a little bit of excess alcohol, but once I got into my 20s, I left it all behind me. So, I was very fit. I was very healthy, and yet, despite my my fitness, my general level of health, suddenly I discovered that I had this cancer. And it shook me. But I immediately sensed that here was an opportunity, a challenge that I must rise to. And of course, it was not anything that I'd have chosen to happen to myself, but or would have wanted for myself or for anybody else for that matter. But, you have to deal with what life throws at you. Sometimes you just have no choice. And I had no choice. The fact was I had cancer. And so I started the whole process of tests. They start off with blood tests and then with move on to MRI scans, and I had to undergo some sort of what you call a biopsy, which is extremely unpleasant. I mean, it was quite excruciating, actually. I wouldn't wish it upon anyone. But nonetheless, you have to see the humor in the situation. I always try to do that. In whatever I'm writing, I always do that. Sometimes my sense of humor runs away with me, and this man here has reined in my writing considerably during that process, because I'd show him each piece as I wrote it and ask him for his opinion on what I'd written, and he would say, "Look, Devamitra, this is not clear, or this is really irrelevant. I don't get what on earth you're writing about."
I said it nicely.
He did indeed say it very nicely, but basically sometimes my sense of humor is something which is only I can laugh at. There's always been one exception in my life, and that was Bhante. The slightest the slightest hint of humor, and Bhante would go, that is to say, Sangrati, would be onto it straight away. He used to laugh at things that in my talks sometimes that I didn't even intend to be amusing. But anyway, my sense of humor has to be reined in. Sthiramanas helped me with that. So it charts the whole progress of my tests. I had to have a PET scan, which checks to see whether or not there's cancer anywhere else in your body. And then when that was cleared, and it was clear that the cancer hadn't spread, despite the fact that I had two infected lymph nodes, then they could start the serious hardcore treatment, which was chemotherapy and radiotherapy. I was put on hormone therapy to begin with, and I continued that for 3 years. Now, these therapies, all of them are quite severe in different ways. Perhaps hormone therapy a little less so, but they induce terrible fatigue, and it's something which I still battle with, actually. I've still got a legacy of fatigue from those treatments. And so at each phase of my progress with the cancer, I would write something. Or I just write as the spirit moved me. And I kept going, I kept adding on to it over a period of 3 or 4 years. I can't remember exactly how long now. And until, of course, I contacted Devamitra, Windhorse Publications, and submitted my manuscript to her. So that's in a nutshell, that's it. That's what happened. I don't know whether that really answers your question. It gives you a flavour anyway.
Yeah, it gives a sense. The main things that you had, what was a serious diagnosis, caught luckily in at a decent time.
In the nick of time, according to my oncologist, yeah. And
then they gave you the full whack of treatment, basically. And one reflection that I found, striking from the book was that, it seems that you experienced no effects directly of the actual cancer that you had. What the book is therefore largely about is how you deal.
And that is certainly true. The only thing I would say about that is that I did know that there was something seriously wrong because of a considerable spurt of blood, which came out when I was passing urine on one occasion, one morning, as it happened. And so that was the only time that I sort of felt anything in my body that, was suggestive of something serious. But there is nonetheless something which, just the knowledge that you had a cancer, which stays with you pretty much throughout, and I certainly still have that, and that is just, it highlights the harsher realities of life. The fact that we are all subject to old age, sickness, and death. And I had to really look those three things hard in the face. For quite a while, I didn't know whether I was going to be, whether my cancer had spread, whether I was, in other words, terminally ill or not. So that was interesting dealing with that. It was a period of about 11 weeks. And it was a very, very useful period, because when you feel yourself that much on the edge, as it were, it heightens your awareness of all sorts of things, of oneself, one's mental states, of other people, of the environment, and even of the problems of the world. And I found that it shifted my perspective, especially on world problems. It even shifted my perspective on my own life, and my relationship with my friends, and so on and so forth. So this is something which it's one of the positives, I would say, of having such a serious diagnosis. So I don't know, I've lost track of your question now. Am I getting?
Yeah, no, I think that's interesting what you're getting onto this, because it feels like that's one of the main features of certainly of your reflections in the book, are what happens when your mortality kind of comes to the fore. Whatever's positive in that. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about what that is, if you like. It feels like that's one of the main kind of lessons from the book. Do you think that is well, maybe what the effect of that is, and how much do you think that relates to your Buddhist practice? Is it a fruit of your Buddhist practice that you were able to capitalize on it in that way, or was it something that you think would you see in other people potentially who were getting treatment at the same time?
I certainly saw it in some people who were being treated, not many, but with some. In my own case, very often it's very strange, but the sort of very often these kind of experiences come with an awareness of one's own mortality, an awareness of impermanence heightens, for many of us, our sense of beauty. That's certainly been my experience. And walking around the parks, I did many times when I had the legs to do it. I didn't always. I would just notice things that I hadn't noticed previously, even though I'd looked hard before. And I saw that there's almost like the hidden beauty in things. And I remember talking with one woman who had a much more serious cancer than mine. She had metastatic lung cancer. And she just said to me with the sweetest smile you can imagine, when you get something like this, it shifts your perspective on life. And clearly for her, it had been a positive experience. Although I think it would be fair to say that for the majority of people, it's not like that at all. But for her, it was. And I think I'm sure that there are many others like her, but they're relatively few, I would say.
What do you think are the conditions for a person in facing a serious illness like that, and like you did, making the most of it in that way, and to sort of getting that sort of bonus of a kind of new perspective and new kind of awareness?
Well, I mean, let me come back a little bit and answer the other part of your question, which I didn't answer, because I think it has the key to this, and that is that I think that I was able to face the disease much more positively than I imagined would have been possible had I not been practicing the Dharma for all those years. In fact, I had a foretaste of this when I had a very unpleasant I had shingles down my face, which is the most painful kind of shingles, and shingles is a painful disease, or illness rather. It wasn't a life-threatening illness, of course, but it was very, very painful. And I was able to, well, not knowing what was going on, I just had an intense headache to start with. I was able just to relax into the pain and sort of even find interest in it. In the end, it became fascinating to me. And this must have been 20 years or so, or 15 or 20 years before I was diagnosed with the cancer. And so I'd had a little bit of an insight into how I might respond to intense pain and a more serious illness. But I was surprised, I have to say, that when I, really was faced by something life-threatening, that, just how easy it was to maintain my positive mental states. I hardly lapsed throughout that whole period. I hope Sthiramanas will bear witness to that. I did have one or two moments when I was a little bit weary of chemotherapy, and I think I may have mentioned that on one occasion, but I just let it go. I thought, no, you can't let that get on top of you, and just deal with it, and try to make something of it, try to use it, try to help it deepen your understanding of life, try to sort of somehow see beyond it to something bigger, better, and higher, which for Buddhists, of course, means the spiritual ideal of enlightenment. And ultimately, the total dissolution of this terrible force that affects us all the time, self-clinging, which I experienced very, very intensely on one occasion in solitude in the middle of a 9-month solitary retreat. It was only momentary, but I really felt for the first time in my life I'd seen what I was up against. This terribly strong sort of force, which is out of control and which seemed to be grasping at everything. But of course, you sense that, well, that's not the whole story. There's something beyond that. And I think with dealing with something like a serious illness, something of that sort comes into play too. In a way, you just have to relax into it. Otherwise, you get depressed, you feel bitter, you ask yourself questions, why did this happen to me, and so on. It's like, I think Padmasambhava said, I think we've gone, are we still there? I think Padmasambhava said that, he said on one occasion, I can't remember in what context, only relax. And that was not just meant, I believe, in connection with meditation, but or going into was prepared for that through my Dharma practice over many years, and especially the amount of time I've spent in solitude. I worked out that on one occasion I probably spent deeply valued, and I think that all these things have helped. Have I gone off?
What is it about? What is it about? While you're on it, what is it about solitude that particularly has helped deal with a situation like this?
Well, I think that when you're in a solitary retreat, especially a long one, there's no one to turn to. You're thrown right back on your own resources, and in a way, you're forced. Avatara, which I reflected on many, many occasions when I was actually in solitary retreat. And it's that sense of one's aloneness, which actually is a positive thing, but it's not so easy to experience it in the company of others, although it's not impossible. It's very good if you can. But when you're in solitude, it's there all the time. And I think it's partly that which makes people want to get away from it, to distract themselves, which is a very easy thing to do. Well, it's quite a strong temptation sometimes for people on solitary retreats. I try to resist it, but I found whenever I've realized what was going on, that I was, in a way resisting this sense of my own aloneness, that if I would just relax with it, I suppose that's one way of looking into it, the issue just dissolves. Because I think what underlies that is one's self-clinging. Mm. And I think it just helps to sort of somehow diminish that to some degree. Mm. Again, I've gone off topic. I'm not quite sure where I'm going with all this.
We'll just keep going. We'll find out where we're going.
Turning into Dharma talk.
So I think that's good. I think it's good because I think the book's a combination of many things. Mm. There's lots of things that we can talk about. I hope we will. But this is the central thread through it. I think partly just because it's the central thread in your life is how to live in a way that and how to make the most of experiences. And you particularly talk in relation to the cancer as even welcoming it as a new experience. It's a remarkably positive way of framing it. In fact, that is worth just saying to back you up, that you were positively glowing throughout the experience. It was quite something. I mean, I remember you saying during chemotherapy that you've never been happier. I was like, that's not the normal. That's not when you say to somebody normally, how's chemotherapy? They don't tend to say, I've just never been happier. I mean, obviously there were all sorts of horrible effects that were going on, but you did seem to sort of be able to capitalize on it in a real way. So I just wondered maybe if you could say a little bit more about some of the things that you think put you in a position to be able to really do that. So you've mentioned solitude as well. Are there any other factors from your life and in a way that you've been sort of preparing for this moment without realizing it, that have been positive conditions that made it possible to make the most of this experience?
Well, I think living in community has been a great support, especially actually in many different countries, has been a great support. In what way it's difficult to point or pinpoint, because it's your friend, you can't have all your friends with you all the time. You're lucky you've got a few with you at any time. I'm very fortunate here to live with 11 other men who and we live very, very harmoniously together for the most part. There are always little tensions and so on and so forth between individuals, but for the most part, we're pretty clear of that, and any tensions that arise are dealt with in a positive spirit. So the supportive conditions of the communities that I've lived in have really helped me. I think that another important factor is just having several lifelong friends, people who I've known since I was 24, who are still my friends. We remained friends throughout this, throughout our lives. These are fellow order members, of course, inevitably in any relationship, there's always going to be moments of difficulty and tension. That's part of the sort of rough and tumble of spiritual friendship, I suppose. But we have remained good friends. And that their friendship in particular has been really, really important to me throughout my life, and especially at the time that I was diagnosed with the cancer and going through these really quite grueling treatments. I think another factor to bear in mind is that I always took very seriously the importance of a daily meditation practice, and I've rarely not done that. If I've been traveling and it's been impossible to do it, or very difficult because you're on a plane or something overnight, then of course I've not done that. But as soon as I arrive where I'm going, the next day I will make sure that I meditate. The only time I was knocked off my cushion, so to speak, was with chemotherapy, and that was a great loss to me. That for a period, pretty much close to a year, I found it so difficult. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to objectify my experience, write it down, so that I kind of have a better understanding of it, but also as a means of trying to somehow find some clarity within my own mind. In a way, trying to stay sane, if you like, or just trying to stay positive. So meditation has been the base practice of my life. On top of that, regular times in the course of my life. And so I keep that thread of the Dharma going. Of course, not all the time. It depends what happens, what my life throws up, what the circumstances are. Something which will just make me sit up and think, samsara always goes wrong, or whatever. And relate that to the lakshanas or whatever.
So, in a way, it's sort of, you're very sort of fortunate at the point in which you came to this cancer diagnosis, that you had decades of this respond to the situation. I know in writing this book that you've already mentioned that one of the things that inspired you to keep going with the writing and even to turn it into a book was that it was being read by other people who were going through cancer, and you had a sense that it might be a solace to them, or it might be an inspiration to them.
Yeah.
They might not be a Buddhist at all. Do you think? What do you think that they can? Are they sort of? Is all hope lost for people who haven't got that kind of experience? And what might they? What might your sort of? I guess what would you say to somebody who, not a Buddhist, got a new cancer diagnosis? What would you be saying to them?
Well, I think the main thing I'd say would be to try to remain in the most positive frame of mind that you can. I actually think that's the key to getting through the whole process, especially with the treatments. But if you don't have any training in that, of course, that's not an easy thing to do. It's very difficult to know what you would say. It would depend so much on the individual as well. But I know that, well, I did post some of my writings on the Macmillan there were people who were clearly looking for something positive, and they found what I'd written very, very helpful indeed, and a bit refreshing, I think. And so that I found that at the time very, very encouraging with regards to my writing. But I also think that it proves, for example, that this book could be of value to others, to whether they're Buddhist or not. And I sincerely believe that's the case, because the issues that I'm trying to address are universal. They're existential, in fact. We all have to face these issues, whether we like it or not, sooner or later. And I've really tried to look at the issues. Of course, I'm bringing a Buddhist perspective to that, but that's simply because that's been my way through. But I think that other people can possibly take courage from that and find their own way through. But I think the key thing is I'd say to anyone, is just try to remain in the most positive frame of mind that you can, and in just do anything which helps them to maintain that. I mean, for example, one of the things that I did when I was incapacitated by either chemotherapy or radiotherapy was listen to a lot of music, because I'm in this very room that I'm speaking from, on my own most of the time, and just listening to Beethoven or Liszt or Schubert. They're the three composers I tended to be drawn to for some reason at that time, and feeling great sort of taken great they were a source of inspiration to me. Now, of course, not everyone's going to listen to that kind of music or want to listen to that kind of music, but you've got to look for things in life which will somehow lift you up and bear your spirits up. I don't know what else to say, really. It's always very difficult when people receive a serious diagnosis. I've certainly spoken to a few. And certainly spoken to people on the chemo ward and the radiotherapy unit who are really struggling, and you just don't quite know what to say other than be positive to them. They have to find their own way through. They need their own support systems, I suppose, is what people working in that world would say. But so many people don't have them. It's very sad, really. I don't think I can really answer your question.
It's striking as well. You mentioned this woman in the book, and I think there's others as well who also, without that sort of through whatever means they have seemed to have arrived at a point of being able to remain quite positive, as you say, in the face of it. It seems by the seriousness of it, and in a way, a number of people seem to be able, like some people seem to be able to grab that and allow it to sort of open them up, and you were especially well prepared for that and able to do that very fully. But
can I add one more thing to that? I think that, of course, some people would have been able to find their way through because they had some sort of religious faith. And I don't know whether that was the case. I suspect it was the case with one or two of the people who I spoke. They may have been, had faith in God. They were Christian or Muslim or whatever. And I think that, in fact, of course, it's a natural thing when people come up against some serious problem in their life, some real crisis, they turn to religion, and it helps them. And so I think some people find their way through that way.
I guess so. In a way, it's like a lot of your reflections are sort of using the cancer, if you like, to reflect more about the existential situation about your life. That's probably the majority sort of your reflections in the book.
Yes.
But what was also striking was that you also, for a Buddhist, had an unusual experience in that you had to go through all of these variety of treatments, and also you particularly commented about how other people were responding to you having a cancer. So that it was like, I guess I was wondering what did you learn about cancer, particularly with your sort of detailed perspective and your willingness to kind of cancer. First thing that comes to mind is something about how people responded to it. I wonder if you could say something about that.
Well, the first thing to say is that it was a very strange thing to tell members of my community and other friends that I had a cancer, because this happened to me several times in different situations. I felt that there was a sudden kind of withdrawal. It's almost as if they drifted away from me. Not that they wanted to, or they were being unkind or anything of that sort. It wasn't like that. But it's as if a gap had opened up between us. I mean, with my good friends, of course, that gap closed very quickly. But it's as if there's a sort of, you mentioned the word cancer to some people, to just pretty much anyone. Well, I've got cancer or whatever. It's good. And it's there's a very, it's not as gross as that. It's a much more subtle response, but I picked it up many, many times, and I found myself guilty of it. I comment upon that in the book as well. I suppose it's a reflection of the general human tendency to want to not face reality. Of course, it's, if you like, it's me that's going through the cancer, but it reminds the other person perhaps that this might happen to, it could happen to them too. And we know that cancer is increasingly common. So that was one thing that I noticed. I can't think of, I mean, I think that's the most striking thing. What else did you have in mind?
You talked in that connection about this whole phenomenon of having a cancer scare. It's interesting. It was like bringing a Buddhist angle onto something that, because people talk about having cancer scares all the time, for example. I'm familiar with that. You sort of see it from the outside, but you were sort of in the middle of that, and you were hearing other people's stories of that, and you're quite sort of, I don't know, you're quite scathing of the idea of a cancer scare. Whether you can say a bit more about that.
I hope I'm not too scathing, but I think that I didn't. Upon reflection, it seemed to me that to speak in terms of a cancer scare doesn't help anybody. Speaking as someone who's done it, I mean, I don't think I've spoken in terms of a cancer scare, but I know what the syndrome is. Really what you're talking about, it's got nothing to do with cancer. It's to do with your own mental state. At least that's how it struck me. It certainly was how it struck me in relation to my own reaction, my own experience. And yes, I think I was a little bit scathing about it, because I think that I think it is an unhelpful way to look at something. You've got a health problem and they're going to check in case it's cancer, just to rule out cancer. That's the sort of thing people might say, I don't know. But and then you get all uptight about, or nervous or anxious about the fact, I might have cancer. And I don't think that that really helps. I mean, for example, when I was told by my GP that, she's referring me to Bart's Hospital for a suspected prostate cancer. First of all, I knew that it was serious, and from the expression on her face and so on. But and that's just it just brought me face to face with the unpleasant, or some of the unpleasant elements in human experience. And I was being confronted by them. And it was just like any hint of fear initially was not present at all. I just thought, this is serious. How am I going to deal with it? And I went away. I walked around the park several times and just tried not even to necessarily think about what I was going to do about it, but feel my way forwards, as well as thinking about it, working it out. But the first thing I knew, as I've mentioned many times, I've already mentioned it this evening, was that I knew I had to maintain positive mental states. And that was the challenge before me. But yes, coming back to your point about the cancer scare, I think it probably doesn't help to think in those terms.
You're saying something in a book about it's sort of the scare is being scared is the abstraction, because the moment it's an abstraction into the future of something that might happen.
That's right.
And in the instance where you actually do have cancer, you're not faced with a fear. You're faced with a reality, and the tone of that's quite different. I thought that was sort of quite striking, and it's one of a number of reflections that you have about this issue of fear, which you seem to sometimes you seem to sort of, maybe you could just say a little bit more about the theme of fear, or how you related to fear throughout this.
That's right, with cancer treatment. Well, it's not as if there's been no fear arising. Certainly, there's been moments of that, but I never allowed it to overwhelm me. I knew that, like all mental states, it would pass. I tried to let it in, of course. I don't think I pushed it away at all, but it tended to be fleeting. It tended to be just like a sudden butterfly in your stomach. And then, oh, all right, off you go. But before I received this diagnosis, I did have, as I mentioned in the book, I had a basal cell carcinoma, which is a very innocent sort of skin cancer. And I knew that I always knew that there was a possibility that it might be what it turned into. And the idea that it could really, whenever I thought about it, especially when I was in India, where there was no easy access to good medical help or care, it really used to sometimes flare up this sort of this fear. But I found that I think that was a useful training for me, because I always managed to just, keep it under control without pushing it away. I certainly experienced it, but I let it go as well. I would just calm myself down in one way or another. But it's as if the idea of a cancer of any sort, certainly for many people, and including me, before I really got a cancer, it touches an irrational nerve. I suppose it's to do with the fact that we don't like to be reminded of our own mortality, and also not just mortality, but serious illness, and especially an illness like a disease like cancer, which can be very, very painful and can result in very, very painful deaths. We know that. And it's like the pain. You don't want to let that pain into your life. But
what's the problem? Surely
what's the problem?
From my perspective, that makes perfectly good sense to sort of why think about something so unpleasant. What would be your response to?
Well, why think of something unpleasant?
Yeah, as in what's in a way what's wrong with avoiding
those painful thoughts?
Yeah,
those uncomfortable thoughts. Well, I mean, of course, as a Buddhist, as you know, I would not wish to do that. That's why I've gone into solitary retreat a lot. Why it's been so important to me, and why I can't even say why it's such a uniquely positive experience. But you learn to sort of deal with your own mental states much more easily, I think, through solitude. It trains you to deal with tough things when they actually do arise. But yes, why would someone who's not practicing Buddhism want to let those things in? Well, those experiences in, I can well understand they wouldn't. I mean, for instance, I remember my mother used to complain if I ever wanted to watch Shakespeare on television when I was young. She said, "Why do you want to watch that morbid stuff?" And because it's full of people being, well, what Shakespeare's like. There's always a few people end up dead at the end of the play and that sort of thing. Well, if it's a tragedy anyway. And she didn't want to face anything serious in life, although she's quite good at it in her own way. But people don't like to be reminded of it. But if you're a Buddhist, you've got to allow yourself to be reminded of it and seize it as an opportunity. I've always tried to do that. I think from a very early age, I understood, certainly as a Buddhist, but I think the spirit of this was to some degree already alive in me before I came into contact with the Dharma, which was to try to make the most of adversity. I mean, just in simple things. I remember, for example, going for a general audition. These are nightmares for actors, by the way, but a general audition on one of the largest stages in the West End of London for something I knew perfectly well. I didn't stand a chance of getting. I walked on stage and I knew it was going to be a humiliating experience. You've got all the stagehands in the wings watching you, and you've got this vast auditorium which seems completely empty, and way in the distance because a tiny little light where there's about 3 or 4 people standing watching you. I had to sing a song. And I was not out of tune, but out of time with the pianist. And after about 30 seconds, this voice bawled out from the back of the stalls, "Next!" And that's really humiliating. And I knew something like that was likely to happen, but it's like, I also felt, and I knew that it would be quite character building. I'd entered the profession in which this sort of thing happened. And if you wanted to survive, I brought something of that attitude also with me to Buddhism. But of course, many teachers emphasize the importance of making the most of adversity. And so you get a cancer, well, there's a wonderful opportunity to
in terms of how I'd characterize you, in terms of your Dharma teaching, but also you as a person, I think tough is one of the words that would that would come to mind. I think, but it's also it's not a kind, it's an admirable quality, and it's a sort of, I have a clear sense of you as having really trained yourself and really trained your mind, and therefore being able to make a most, or not just to get through a situation like this, but be able to make the most of a situation like this. Because one of the most striking things that comes through the book, it's worth mentioning in connection to this, is not just out of your decision to really look at the situation that you're in, seems to emerge all this beauty and joy and this sense that you've never been happier. The opportunity was there to be taken. And I mean, there's some very striking descriptions in the book of you finally finding a way to get to Victoria Park, which is a 10-minute walk down the road, but which was a sort of odyssey of a journey for you at times during your treatment.
Yeah.
Or even when you couldn't do that, just looking out of the window here at the couple of trees that you can see and the sky and so on, with such a sort of with such a tenderness and pleasure really that's in them. I wonder what, maybe you could say something about beauty in your experience during this.
Well, I did mention that I think a sense, whenever one has a sense of impermanence, it's usually accompanied by a deepening awareness of the beauty surrounding us. And I remember one of my friends sitting on you can't see it, there's a sofa sort of behind me, looking out of my window and just saying, what an uninspiring outlook. I mean, he lives in Wales, in a cottage in the middle of the mountains, and this is all I have, and all I could see out that window was actually 3 trees in the distance. They're not very close, but I watched them because I had nothing else to. It was the only window I had. It was the only view I had because chemotherapy had knocked all the strength out of my legs. It was even worse with radiotherapy, and so all I could do sometimes was just look at those trees, and I just began to see beauty in them in a way that I would not have expected, simply because they were the most beautiful objects anywhere near me. I saw them, being thrown about by the wind, being battered by the rain, etc., etc. And I saw the light shifting on them at different times of the day through different seasons. I remember this very, very vividly. And it all struck me as being extraordinarily beautiful. And that was a revelation to me. And I think this comes about because when you are pretty much prostrate like that, you just have to give way to what's there. You have to give way to your experience. You have to relax, in other words, in a deeper sort of way. And I think this is, if I gained anything from going through this whole experience, it was I learned to relax even more deeply than I had managed on my 9-month solitary retreat. All I felt, I think that I sensed that happening then, but it seemed to me to go a stage further. I mean, it's very easy, for example, to appreciate the beauty of an environment of when you're in an isolated hut in the woods in the Spanish mountains, but to just wander up an avenue very close to this building towards a park with all the surrounding ugliness, nonetheless, you can see within that ugliness and beyond it, especially we're blessed to have at least one avenue of trees which leads up to the park. Just see the beauty and the grandeur in those trees. And I noticed in a way I'd never noticed it before. I'd always appreciated that avenue. I'd always appreciated the trees. But this time it was like I was seeing them afresh. I was seeing them with different eyes. And I think that comes about because of the certainly I didn't feel that I had any choice. And I think what was being relaxed was, to some extent, my clinging to this particular life. I didn't know whether I'd survive. I mean, one of my friends thought I wasn't going to survive the treatments. and was very, very concerned about me. And that somebody else said when they saw me walking in Victoria Park, they didn't say this at the time, by the way, but later told me, she said, I remember her saying, she said, Devamitra, you look like a dead man walking.
You did look pretty rough at times.
Well, I had very heavy doses of radiotherapy and chemotherapy with hormone therapy going on underneath all the time. And Vijayamala, who was one of the people who endorsed my book, commented to Sona, one of my long-standing friends, that she's quite sort of shocked by the amount of treatment I've had. And I had very, very severe doses of things. So I was pretty much prostrate with it. But I think because of that, I somehow had to surrender something within. I don't know. I think it was to do with just thinking, okay, well, let's let go of this life. Is it really worth it? Not that I wanted to die, by the way, but it was just, although of course eventually I wouldn't, may not be that far off. Of the fundamental issue of all Buddhist teaching is dissolving that really hard grip, which we call self-clinging. I think it's, for me, the whole world just sprung more to life than it ever had done. And in a certain sense, that was true. And ironically, it came about at a time when I was experiencing some very, very severe side effects from chemotherapy. And yet, because of that deep sense of relaxation into, well, there's more to life than just this one. There's more to life than you, in a sense. I think that's what helps to bring that about. And I think it does shift the way you perceive the world. And I certainly saw the world as a more beautiful place. I remember, I've written about this in the book, one morning walking out very early onto the terrace, which is just beyond my window, and looking about me. Not the prettiest sight in the world, but there was something about the quality of the air, the warmth. It was in, I think, early June or late May or something. The few animals that were about, there was a crow, there was a goldfinch, and the trees were there. There was wonderful perfume from jasmine, waft experience. Just completely blew me away. It was wonderful, and I don't know how you account for that, but it wouldn't happen normally to me, something like that. It was very, very intensely felt, but intense in a kind of relaxed way, if that's not a...
I think as well as this experience, or alongside this experience of heightened beauty that you were describing, you also talked about laughing a lot more. Yes. And I just sort of wanted to comment on this, your sense of humour. You referenced it earlier and said I need to rein you in, which is sometimes true. But it's lovely, and it's sort of, I was rereading the book recently and feel like, it's very, very funny at points, and you've got a very sort of cheeky sense of humour, partly just all these treatments that you were going through, and you sort of really go through. It's quite sort of humiliating in a way, a lot of it. You're really at the mercy of the doctors and nurses who you were very grateful to in your descriptions, but you're really sort of put through the ringer and get fired at questions at, and you get asked a lot about quite sensitive topics that you find very funny and like to make lots of jokes about as you go. So there's something really light and enjoyable about that. It's like your whole lens on the situation is one of fun or something. And I think my favourite, you've got lots of little, the books written in, it's kind of quite episodic. And so you've got lots of little little sort of subtitles for the lots of which are sort of puns. I think my favourite was Know Your Enema, which I thought was I just thought it was very funny. But this, I think, one reflection that I think probably stayed with me the most from, or the thing that I sort of feel like I learned from you the most was, I remember around the time that you're writing about in the book, having this conversation with you about tragedy and comedy.
Oh yeah.
Like it was a reflection that you seemed to be having on life and your experience. In the face of a tragedy, you were finding comedy, and you were talking about the relationship between those two. I think you talked about poignancy as a kind of outcome of the two. Maybe you can just say a little bit about that. And it really struck me. And I think that captures the tone of what you were just talking about in terms of beauty and so.
Well, because I can't really consider that there's very much genuinely tragic about my own life. I think I've been very fortunate in many ways. I've suffered very few myself, and I had no shame in laughing at others either. Not that I want to poke fun at them in a hurtful way or anything like that, but I just couldn't stop laughing because it was a Sunday afternoon. It was summer time, I think, and I just kept thinking, the way these people are dressed is so bizarre. It really is very funny if they could only see. And it struck me, that we're living in this, we're in the midst of this huge cosmic joke all the time, but people can't see it. And they take themselves so seriously. I'm sure that I've done that myself, but it was just at that moment, it seemed so absurd but absurdly funny. And I better not go into more detail, but that's the sort of thing that struck me. I wasn't looking for this, it just struck me. That is bizarre. That is bizarre behavior. Where has all this behavior come from? And actually feeling quite delighted by it as well. And delighted that I wasn't part of it, that I wasn't getting up to those, indulging in all the human foibles that we so frequently do indulge in. And that was partly because of my overarching frame of mind, the sort of my response to cancer. I don't see things quite so in the same light now, although I do feel that wherever there is tragedy, if you look hard enough, you probably find comedy as well. And I was very, very interested to see something Subhuti sent me. There's an interview with a young Scottish film director called Ben Sharrock. And he sort of makes this point himself, that what he tries to show in his films is the comedy and tragedy in life and how closely connected they are. And what I resonated very strongly with what he'd written and the way he'd written it. I felt a kindred spirit there, really. And he very much encapsulated my own view of life. And I think we shouldn't, without cause, of course, one shouldn't try to cause offense. I wouldn't want to do that, but at others, even at the animals. I used to find the shenanigans in the lake with the waterfowl absolutely hilarious. I used to love watching them, their little squabbles, especially the coots, which are very quarrelsome creatures. That greatly amused me.
Great. So maybe I'll just ask one more question before we open up to others. So yeah, if you've got questions coming to mind, then do be prepared to ask them. Also on YouTube, maybe you could put them in the chat, and we might be able to get Walter to last question, I guess, it's just sort of where are you with it all now, in a way? The book was the narrative. You're in remission, but there's still the ongoing uncertainty. They sort of left you with the thing of saying, well, 50% it might recur. I know more recently you've been having more tests, and the whole thing remains sort of uncertain. You seem in good health at the moment, and that's great. But how do you relate to being this uncertain state of being in remission?
Right. Well, I think it's something that, of course, I've had to learn to live with. And I think many cancer patients have to live with it. And I think many of them, unfortunately, torture themselves with the fact that, they've got this six-monthly review, which we all have, and you're not quite sure what the next review is going to reveal. So there's always some uncertainty in the background. I've tried to, again, capitalize on this, because life is uncertain. That's just a fact we have to learn to live with. The only certain thing about life, as we know, is that one day we will die. Everything else is uncertain. So I think it's been a great training for me to have to deal with this uncertainty for so long. I was talking with someone just the other day, actually, who was finding it very difficult to live with the uncertainty about a totally different matter, not at all life-threatening. But he said to me, I just find uncertainty so difficult to deal with. I said, well, it's not easy. And I think why it's not easy is because perhaps it's an echo of the fact that the whole of life, the whole of existence is uncertain. We never know what will happen next. And certainly if you've got a cancer, you never know what's just around the corner. So I've had very positive results for 4.5 years, but there was a slight hint in one of my recent meetings with my oncologist that she was perhaps beginning to get a little bit concerned, and the last time she seriously was concerned, and so I'm having more tests done. So my cancer journey is far from over. It may be. There's no evidence of cancer yet in my body, but I'm having 2 more, an MRI scan and another PET scan, just to make sure. But my cancer marker is definitely rising, and she's concerned about that. We need to find out what's going on. It may be perfectly innocent. It may mean that my PSA level being my cancer marker, hasn't quite leveled off yet after all the treatments. But on the other hand, it may be that it's recurring. And so that puts me back on the edge. And it's been very interesting, again, to sort of be brought back into that greater degree of uncertainty, because, I don't know, I've learned I'm so much more at ease with it than I was at the beginning. So clearly something positive has happened in the meantime, and I take great heart from that. Of course, I don't want the cancer to recur, but if it recurs, what can I do about it? I've then got to face the choice, which I've been pondering rather a lot recently, which is, well, what's most important to me? Quality of life or length of life? Because I know that there are treatments which would be made available to me, which could extend my life which could effectively put my particular kind of cancer, because it's quite unusual, into a state of dormancy for a number of years. But on the other hand, it involves treatments that I have already had and I really don't want to go through. In fact, I said quite bluntly to my oncologist when the last doctor said, I'm not doing any more chemo. you have to weigh these things up. Well, what's most important? Quality of life for a relatively short space of time, or length of life. But please don't worry, Windhorse team. I'm sure I'll live long enough to promote the book. I'm absolutely determined to live long enough to do that. I'll give it everything I've got. But it's just part of the uncertainty of life, really. I mean, I'm in an uncertain position because of cancer. You're in an uncertain position because you exist. I quite often joke about the fact that, it's a possibility that eventually my cancer could become terminal. But I said, but actually, we've all got a terminal disease. It's called life. It's just that we don't think of it in those terms. But it is terminal because sooner or later you're going to die, like it or not. Is that a positive note?
It's a positive note. on that bombshell, let's open up to hear from you. So you do ask us some questions. What are the things that you'd like to know from Devamitra? Perhaps you could do a little, either if you're on Zoom, you could wave wildly or do the little hands up gesture, and then Walter could unmute you, or you'll need to unmute yourself actually, but we'll make that possible. And if you're on YouTube, then maybe you could put something in the chat. And Walter could ask those for you. So yeah, has anyone got any questions for us? I say for us, I mean for Devamitra.
Oh, you're included.
I don't think I could be included.
While we're waiting for questions, I'd just like to say hello to Debbie Corley if she's watching on YouTube.
Apparently, the chat function is not activated on YouTube, so okay. Sorry about that if you're on YouTube, but I'm sure there'll be other ways to ask Devamitra. You're going to do a little bit of a tour of the country and so on, aren't you, to launch your work in a few different places?
Yes, I've got 9 launches, well, including this one, there are 9 launches altogether, so I'm visiting different places. I'm looking out for more. If you're at a centre which doesn't have a launch yet, just try and encourage the order members there to invite me along.
Great. So it looks like Dharma Mega's raised her hand. So maybe you could unmute yourself, Dharma Mega, and we could hear from you.
Well, I thought I'd ask a question while other people are thinking as well. I'm very pleased to hear you're planning on being around for the launches, Devamitra. And it was really great working with you on the book, and I've read it a number of times. And I suppose the question I'm left with is partly not so much anticipating, like listening to your story of the experience of having cancer and cancer treatments, but a question about your friends. You were saying that your living in community was one of the really supportive conditions. And in the book, you reflect a number of times on being in relationship with other people who have cancer or something else going on that's significant in their lives. What is a good way of being a friend to someone who is facing this kind of existential edge alive now, whether that's cancer or something else? Like what did your friends do that were most helpful to you during this time?
Well, I think I've been very blessed, frankly, to live with people who were very, very kind to me and really went out of their way to help me. But if you've got a friend who's got cancer and they need a bit of support, I suppose especially if they're on their own, go and see them and just be a positive presence for them. I think that the more anyone can come into contact with positive emotion or just a positive attitude is helpful. It can help you to sort of lift yourself out of the doldrums sometimes. And I'm not talking specifically about cancer now, but in any difficult situation in life. Just show some kindness and generosity. What more can one say, really? I can't think of anything specific to cancer. I know that. I have been in a situation where someone's had a terrible loss, I won't go into the details, but he was almost inconsolable about what had happened, and I found it very difficult to say anything to him. All I could do was sit and hold his hand, and he understood. He didn't want to talk. He just wanted some gesture of sympathy and understanding, and that goes a long way. I think that's, you know, it's very easy to underestimate something like that. I think the worst thing if you're in a situation like that is if you're completely alone. And I know that many cancer patients get very lonely and get very down because some of them are alone. Not all of them, but they've got family around, but some of them. But I know some people are alone. It must be extremely difficult for them. There probably are support systems in place for most of these people through the NHS, but I think they probably do ask for volunteers and that sort of thing. But human warmth, human presence means so much. It's very easy to underestimate it. But I am absolutely blessed. I mean, I've got lots of lovely young friends here who I'm delighted with.
You, in a way, it's so easy, isn't it, to avoid those who are ill or suffering in some way. Yeah. I've sometimes done it out of a sense of like, oh, I just wouldn't know what to say to them. And in a way, it's quite reassuring what you're saying is that that's not really the point. Or you don't need to.
Yeah, I don't think you need to say anything really. Sometimes, I mean, it depends who you're with, of course, but sometimes just a warm presence can have a tremendously positive impact.
Because I was struck by you saying in this that there were times where people would bring up the cancer, they'd want to talk about it, and you didn't always want to talk about.
That's right.
You didn't always want to talk about cancer.
That's right.
Maybe that's relevant in this. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I didn't always want to talk about it, and it was a difficult issue for me initially. But then I realised that even though I didn't want to talk about it, some of my friends seemed to need to talk about it with me, I don't know, for their own reassurance or whatever. And so I tried to respond positively to that when I sensed it. But it's I didn't want to dwell too much on the cancer itself. I didn't mind, of course, dwelling upon the issues behind that. That is to say, one's sense of one's own mortality and impermanence, and sickness, etc. But specifically cancer, I didn't want to talk about. I don't know why. I just didn't want to go there. But I did not want to avoid the fundamental issues that they were throwing up in front of my face.
Yeah, my recollection of living with you throughout the time was that you were very willing to be as self-sufficient as you possibly could be, but there were at times where you clearly needed quite a lot of practical help as well. So we were, in a way, it's very fortunate that you were here, and we're in a lucky situation. There were lots of us, so it was never too much of a strain.
Sure. Might feel the burden of having to look after you.
Yeah. We've got a question in the chat. Let me have a question. Have a look. So let me get a little bit closer so I can see. So Maitrinandi and Priyavardhana saying, can you say more about how you found or dealt with the effect of chemo on your cognitive functioning? You're talking about chemo brain, which you mentioned a lot in the book, that you had to develop patience with. Yeah, this phenomenon of, you talked about a sort of mental fog earlier on. How do you deal with that? Because that's a whole other kind of challenge, isn't it?
Yes. Well, I think that's partly why I kept up the writing, because I knew I had to keep mentally alert and stimulated. And I remember sitting at my desk. Sometimes I just made myself sit at the desk, even though I could hardly sit up sometimes, but to write something, anything, and I'd play around with a single sentence all morning, just to try and get it right and try to sort of convince myself that I could still do that. But it's not just chemotherapy. Hormone therapy is terrible in this respect as well. It affects the way your brain works. It's very, very difficult indeed to describe what that effect is. I found chemo brain one of the most disturbing elements in all my treatments, actually. And many cancer patients talk about this. It's as if you're almost not quite there. As if there's an alienation that's been forced into you by this poison that they put into your bloodstream to kill off the cancer cells. But it's very difficult indeed. But I was determined to try and remain as mentally as alert as I could. I couldn't read. I did try reading, but I just couldn't concentrate, just as I couldn't meditate. And I found all that very, 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 very painful. But I could sit down with, at my computer and try to write something and try to make sense of something. And that was a real assistance to me. And of course, and some of what I wrote, even though it was not very much under those conditions, is actually in the book. It came directly out of that experience, or my attempt to sort of go beyond that experience. But one of the most difficult things I found about, and this is not so much human brain, but the effect of hormone therapy. And it took me a long time before I discovered what was really going on. Was that it's well known that hormone therapy affects the brain, and reduces your cognitive abilities. And I was giving talks at this time, and I was wondering, sometimes I found myself struggling to say something, whereas, which had never been a problem before when I was giving talks. I was trying to work out what this all meant. And the fact that for men, hormone therapy inhibits the production of testosterone, and it's actually testosterone. Your brain is dependent upon testosterone. It needs testosterone to sort of function efficiently. I think I've still got some legacy from all that, actually, but I've done everything I could to try and maintain my mental acuity. It's greatly improved from the time of those treatments, but it's a tricky one. You've somehow got to find a way of engaging the mind, but your whole body doesn't want to do that as well. Because you're so seriously fatigued by chemotherapy or whatever it is. But I felt it was really important to make that effort, and I'm glad that I did. Even though I couldn't achieve very much, but I could achieve something, and it was kind of like a morale booster.
Yeah, I think that one striking thing that comes out of that is that I like this image of you, right in the midst of it, writing and that turning into the book. I think it shows that slowly. You really craft your sentences. So I realised that it looks like our connection's been a bit unstable, and apparently we cut out a bit earlier on. So sorry about that if you've lost us at any point. But thanks for sticking it out. You really sort of craft your sentences. So there's a real sort of beauty to the writing. You really sort of the writing really takes flight at points. But also it means that you are writing the book, live. The experiences it's not all in hindsight. It's something that's sort of coming out live from your experience. I bumped into somebody in the park yesterday who comes along to the London Buddhist Centre and has been for a while. And I mentioned that I was in jail. Like there's sort of almost like a thing of myth, Devamitra's teaching around that time, because it was very you were very in touch with something that you were communicating very freely. And I think what's great is that was live coming across to the people there, but it also feels like it's live coming across here in the book. And so it's a really good read. I was just on a solitary retreat myself, and I was going against Devamitra's general advice not to read very much at all on solitary by reading his book, which he seems to allow. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought. I just saw we had another question, but I'll try and finish it. The reading it again on solitary, just finding it because it's so live and because it's so well written, it's it's a very engaging read. It's very funny, and you just sort of go through this, in a way, you're taken through this whole ordeal, if you like, that you go through. So there is something slightly shocking about just the amount that you have to go through, and yet you've got the whole thing framed in this with all these deep reflections and this real sense of beauty and enjoyment. Maybe, yes, just to another one from Maitranandi and Priyavarta, talking about being unable to meditate during all the therapies. Did you feel like, did you come into a new appreciation of your connection with the Buddha, or perhaps even broadly your connection with the Buddhist ideal? What was the effect of that for you?
Well, I can say I'm not so much about it, not so sure about a new connection, but certainly a deepening of my existing connection. Is why I've said on a number of occasions, I don't regret what's happened, even though I wouldn't have wished it upon myself. But it definitely helped me to deepen my understanding of the Dharma. I've got no doubts about that whatsoever. So I can't say any kind of new connection. It's just seeing more clearly what I've always known, or what we've always been taught. I think that's the main thing I take away from it. And of course, so it's not so much in relation to the Buddha I'm speaking, it's more in relation to the Dharma, but then without the Buddha, no Dharma.
Great. So yeah, it certainly seemed, in my experience of living with you, it certainly seemed that the ideal was very alive for you, and you seemed very free in communicating that to those around you. So yeah, I guess just to say, I'm very, very grateful to you as a friend, generally, but also I feel very blessed to have lived with you through this period and to have benefited from your reflections. I really feel like it's really deepened my life to go through, to sort of see up close that experience and that sort of encounter with illness, and to benefit from the positivity of your reflection on it all the same. So I feel, in a way, it's just been re-alivened by me reading the book, and I hope others will get something of the same experience through reading it. So yes, I'll get Walter to post some links to where you can buy it, and I really, really recommend doing so. I think there are a couple of links that we'll post on YouTube and on, I think on YouTube it's in the description underneath. If you're watching it on YouTube, there's links that you can click, whether you're in the UK and Europe or whether you're in the US and Canada. There are different links for you, and we'll be posting it in the chat here on the Zoom as well. And yeah, do get yourself a copy, and yeah, I hope you really enjoy it. I imagine you will. So yeah, thanks very much for joining us, whether you're watching on YouTube now or you're here with us on Zoom. And yeah, we'll call an end to the affairs of the evening. Do you want to say anything at the end?
No, I would just like to echo that. I'd like to thank all of you who've turned up. I would particularly like to thank all the Windhorse team for all the help that you've given me with the book, all your enthusiasm and even excitement about the book. I feel very touched by all that, and I hope that it will sell well, because I believe, some of my friends believe, it can help a lot of people.
Great. So that seems a good note to end on. So yes, good night to you all. Good to see you.
Good night.